Right now it's time to get to someone else. He's a junior senator out of Arkansas. He also happens to be the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Please welcome for the first time the straight shooter with Stephen A. Senator Tom Cotton is on the show. How are you, sir? How's everything going? How you doing?
Hey, Stephen A. Doing very well. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you for being on the show and say hello. I mean, I see you often on my man Sean Hannity's show. I mean, I'm not supposed to be friends with him, but we've been friends for over 23 years, so I know him quite well. He speaks very fondly of you, sir. Thank you for being on the show. Let's get right to it. There was an audio by the president today touching on the subject of how the U.S. had seized an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. I want you to listen to this before I ask my question, please. Listen to this, please.
As you probably know, we've just seized a tanker on the coast of Venezuela, large tanker, very large. Largest one ever seized, actually. And other things are happening, so you'll be seeing that later, and you'll be talking about that later with some other people.
Senator, first of all, I want to know what your thoughts were about what the president had to say and how you feel about it, sir.
Stephen A., I support the seizure of this sanctioned vessel. I understand that it's been under international sanctions now for some time. That's very common with sanctions. As you sanction specific vessels, oftentimes the owners or operators of them try to reflag them into new countries, change their names, what have you. But our government is very effective at tracking these vessels. We've seen seizures like this elsewhere, typically in the Middle East, especially as it relates to Iran. But it's just a reminder that Venezuela, unlike any other Latin American country, poses a unique danger because it does work in league, not just with drug cartels in its own country, but with Russia and China, Iran, Cuba, North Korea. And I think it's important that our government take these actions where we can to stop the illicit shipment of oil, which is so important to funding the operations of hostile nations like Iran, like Venezuela, like China, and so forth.
Do you feel you're getting full and timely briefings on these boat strikes and similar covert or clandestine operations by the president and his administration?
Yeah, I have, Stephen A. As you said, I'm the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. I'm part of what's known as the Gang of Eight, which is the senior Republican and Democrat on both the House and Senate Intelligence Committee and the Republican and Democratic leaders in both the House and the Senate. We just had another briefing yesterday with Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, John Ratcliffe, the director of the CIA, and General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Not just on the issue of these boat strikes against drug cartels operating mostly out of Venezuela, but on any issue of great importance to our national security. I'm also a senior member of the Armed Services Committee. Sometimes the briefings come through that committee because it's purely a military operation. But I do feel that I'm fully briefed and kept apprised, and that's one reason why I'm supportive of these operations, try to protect our country. And most of the members of the Congress, too, even if they aren't proactively reaching out to them for these briefings, have the opportunity to meet with administration officials, to question them, to review legal opinions, and so forth.
Well, I'm interested. I'm so glad that you said all of that and you explained everything that you're doing. And I thank you for that because I'm not coming from a position like I know, because I don't. And I see a lot of people talking on the air as if they do know, particularly as it pertains to the administration and a lot of things that are going on. So I just want, for clarification purposes, I want to know, have there been situations where the committee was notified too late or not at all? Some of the things that we hear all over the airwaves, permeating the airwaves or what have you, this administration is doing things and operating independent of our government, you know, in terms of the Senate, the House, etc. People bring this kind of stuff up when they're talking about Trump and his administration. And I want to know if there's any accuracy to some of the assertions that have been made in regards to those things.
No, Stephen A., I can't think of any over the last 11 months. I'm sure at some point in my now, nearly 12 years in the Senate, I've been dissatisfied with this, that, or the other quality of briefing from maybe the first Trump administration, maybe the Obama or Biden administrations. Nothing jumps right off the page to me. There are occasions when I think administrations are reluctant to share information beyond the smallest core of our elected members of Congress, like the Gang of Eight, because they're worried about leaks. Because when you share it with the members of Congress, you also share it with a certain number of their staff. And in the most sensitive and exquisitely protected and compartmented programs, I think any administration has some concerns of that. I would add, though, that Marco Rubio, in his role as the National Security Advisor, and John Ratcliffe in his role as director of the Central Intelligence Agency, both used to be members of Congress, and they sat on the intelligence committees. Marco was the chair of the Intelligence Committee. So I think they both have a very good perspective around the president, advising him about what the thinking of a member of Congress is, and especially what the thinking of maybe a backbench or junior member of Congress may be. And I think they've been healthy voices inside the administration to try to find ways to make sure that it's not just the Gang of Eight that has this information, that the elected members of Congress can perform the duties that their constituents expect them to. Obviously, you can't share every sensitive piece of information with every member of Congress, but I do believe that Marco and John are doing a very good job of trying to lean forward and keep Congress informed beyond just the Gang of Eight or beyond just the Intelligence and Armed Services committees.
Now, you've served under multiple presidents, and I want to know, in your opinion, is Trump's approach to intelligence oversight different in any meaningful way from other presidents that you've served that you obviously worked under, or does it fall along the lines of the same in your mind?
If I could quibble a little bit with the way you phrased that, Stephen A., I think it was Tip O'Neill. When someone said Tip O'Neill had served under 8 presidents, he made the point that he didn't serve under presidents; he served with presidents.
That's right, exactly. With president, I apologize, sir. That's why I tried to couch it. But you're right. Go ahead. My bad.
I serve under and for the people of Arkansas. I serve with the president and with my colleagues in the Senate and the House. No, I think the president's approach to intelligence has fit his style and the way he wants to operate. Every president is different. Every president's going to take their intelligence briefings differently. Some want to read a document in advance. Some want to talk it through with their staffers. Some more appreciate visual aids, videos, images, charts, graphs, what have you. I think the president every day, I know almost every day, is working with Marco Rubio, working with John Ratcliffe, Pete Hegseth. I think his approach to what our intelligence committee or community produces is perfectly appropriate. And I think he, like every other president, sometimes disagrees with them, and that's fine. You know, I've read thousands of intelligence assessments, and almost none of those assessments say this is 100% certainty. They speak in terms of confidence, whether we have low, moderate, or high confidence. And when you're talking about certain extremely sensitive subjects that our foreign adversaries want to keep from us, you can't do much better than that. I mean, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping don't just pick up the phone and speak on an open line about what their next moves are. So you can only speak with degrees of certainty, and it's certainly appropriate for any American president to exercise his own judgment and to say to the intelligence community, I understand where you're coming from. I'm not sure you're right about that one. I think it's appropriate for us in Congress to probe as well, to make sure that there's actual underlying evidence that supports judgments that can be used for very high-stakes decisions.
You support the president, I get that, and obviously Pete Hegseth is under him, the secretary, the defense secretary of the United States of America. You went on Meet the Press this weekend and said you have 100% confidence in Secretary Hegseth after the Signalgate report on the September 2nd double-tap boat strike in Venezuelan waters that killed 11 people. Do you still stand by that, and if so, why?
I do. I've known Pete for a very long time, and I've worked closely with him over the last 10 months. And I know there's been controversy swirling around Pete. Obviously, it was a controversial, unconventional nomination. But what I see in Pete is a secretary who's trying to drive badly needed change inside of the department. Some things that I've worked on in Congress for years, I haven't been able to pass into law because we have opposition from the Democrats or sometimes Republicans. It's not always partisan in this space. Sometimes it's just different opinions about the way programs or policies should work. You have Pete come in and take actions, for instance, to increase recruiting and retention when we were suffering badly on the in-strength of our military a year ago. Working to address our munitions crisis. We simply don't make enough weapons fast enough in this country. And I've seen him and his deputy, Steve Feinberg, and the rest of the department take that very seriously, move very fast, work with places like the Pine Bluff Arsenal or the Defense Industrial Park in South Arkansas to try to accelerate the munitions we're manufacturing. So I know there's a lot of attention-grabbing headlines over the last 10 months, but from what I see on the day-to-day work, Pete is driving badly needed change inside the department. He's got a great team around him to do that as well.
I can appreciate your position, but I can also recall, again, it was two different things, but so much was made about Hillary Rodham Clinton and the email server and 33,000 emails and stuff like that. And, people thought that should have disqualified her. But here we are with the Defense Secretary of the United States of America, and he's, texting on his, on his equipment or whatever. And you support that. I mean, you're supportive. I'm not saying you support that, but you're supportive of him under those circumstances. I understand that it's two different peoples, two different things. But one would argue, if it was good enough for people to condemn Hillary Rodham Clinton, why is it not good enough to condemn Pete Hegseth for that?
Yeah, I suppose I'd draw a distinction between the two because Signal is a more secure app with end-to-end encryption versus an unsecure server. I would also point out the facts and the circumstances of the communications between Secretary Hegseth, then National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, Secretary Rubio. A lot of that communication in that group chat was happening nearly contemporaneous as they were notifying their foreign counterparts, so foreign ministers, defense ministers, national security advisors, and friendly nations, that this operation was underway. They were doing that on open telephone lines. So I think it's largely a mountain out of a molehill. I think probably the administration officials have taken lessons learned from that incident and probably changed their practices. But I would draw a distinction between the two, between an unsecure server that is used for routine business for months, if not years on time, and this one chat on an end-to-end encrypted app that is happening contemporaneous to conversations with foreign counterparts over open telephone lines.
Last question on this issue. You called on the Washington Post to apologize to Pete Hegseth and Navy Admiral Frank Bradley for its reporting on it. Why did you do that, sir?
Yeah, I think the Washington Post story the day after Thanksgiving gave a totally false picture of what had happened and wasn't accurate at all on the order that they said Pete gave. The Washington Post made it sound like there were helpless survivors in the water in a life jacket or floating on a wooden plank or something, Stephen A., and that Pete saw that clearly and he ordered Admiral Bradley to kill them, and Admiral Bradley did. That would be a clear violation of the laws of war and the law of the sea. That's not at all what happened. This strike was taken. There's a big cloud of smoke. Pete left. I'm sure he had lots of other things to do. He wanted to be there present during the first operation because it's the first strike against any of these boats. Once the smoke cleared, once the cloud cover cleared, it was obvious that there were two survivors on the capsized boat. They were not helpless. They were not stranded alone in the water. Admiral Bradley made the decision, I think, consistent with the execution order and also with customary military practice to strike that boat again. That is a completely different picture than what the Washington Post portrayed, essentially accusing Pete Hegseth and especially Admiral Bradley of a war crime. Admiral Bradley is a highly decorated career Navy SEAL who's dedicated his life to this nation, and I think they are owed an apology. You can have a difference of opinion. The Washington Post editorial page can say they don't support these strikes. They wish the president wasn't taking them. They think that needs more oversight or what have you. But I think accusing a man like Admiral Mitch Bradley of a war crime is a bridge too far, and that he's owed an opinion. He's owed a debt of gratitude by all Americans for what he's done for 30 years for our nation.
Understood. Let me move on to the Affordable Care Act issue because that's something that's percolating right now. It's been percolating for a while, actually. But Majority Leader John Thune announced that the Senate will vote on Thursday on a Republican-led alternative to the Democrats' 3-year extension of soon-to-expire Enhanced Affordable Care Act tax credits. What is the GOP's plan, sir?
Well, we think it's ironic that Obamacare was called the Affordable Care Act because, unfortunately, it's made health care largely unaffordable for a large number of Americans. Premiums have more than doubled since Obamacare went into effect. In many cases, deductibles and out-of-pocket expenses have more than tripled. The Democrats tried to slap a Band-Aid on this problem in 2021 when they passed these Biden COVID bonuses that eliminated a lot of the fraud provisions that are in the law and notably increased those eligible for subsidies from 400% of the federal poverty level, which is over $125,000, Stephen A., and it goes all the way up to 700%. You're talking about households in my state, in Arkansas, that are making 2 to 3.5 times the median household income with no protection for fraud, with all the money going to insurance companies. We don't think those should continue. What we want to do is try to address the affordability problems that all Americans have with their health insurance. To give you a sense of scale, about 165,000 people in Arkansas get their health insurance from Obamacare. About 10,000 of those make more than 400% of federal poverty, make more than $125,000. 1.4 million get their health insurance on the job. They've seen increases in their health insurance 10, 15, 20%. About 700,000 get it from Medicare. Increases in Medicare this year about 9 to 10%. Medicaid, we have about 800,000 people on Medicaid. Not many Medicaid populations pay premiums. Some do. They've seen some increases as well. We want to address the affordability challenge for everyone, no matter how you get your health care, by trying to restore more control and more choice to patients and to families, to pick the right kind of insurance for them, to eliminate some of the onerous regulations that Obamacare imposed, and to give people their money. Rather than giving money directly to insurance companies, sometimes for people that don't even know they've been enrolled on these programs, give it to families. Let them put it in a health savings account. Let them use it as they see fit, whether it's to pay their premiums or to pay co-pays, whether it's to buy glasses or braces for the kids or what have you. We want to give families more choice in their health care. We think that'll help make it more affordable for everyone.
But Senator Carter, what about the argument that when you listen, there's Obamacare, came in effect 2010, when it actually went into effect like 2014, passed in 2010. Trump comes into office in 2016. He stays there until 2020. All right. So you had a Democrat in the office. You had a Republican in the office. Then Biden comes in office. In other words, there's been ample time for the Republican side of the aisle to come up with a clear plan on how to fix this thing they call a problem, which is the Affordable Care Act, which is Obamacare. So many times the Democrats have accused the Republicans of not having a plan at all. And a lot of American citizens are saying, what's your plan? What's your plan? Trump comes out and he says, hey, we want to put more money in the American people's pocket. Well, okay, that's fine. I appreciate it. But where's the plan that's going to show that that can be executed to the advantage of the American people? What do you say to that as a member of the GOP?
Yeah, well, I would invite them, one, to look at what we'll be voting on tomorrow in the Senate. But I think this is only one step in the administration and the Republican Congress trying to address the high price of health care in this country. I've taken other steps in the past, for instance, to try to get down the price of prescription drugs, especially generic drugs. I think you'll see more steps rolled out. They're trying to spread some of the costs of Obamacare more evenly across the insured population, or to allow more people to buy insurance that fits them. You know, you want different insurance when you're in your 20s and single versus your 30s and 40s and have kids versus, say, 50s and 60s, and you're empty nesters again. We think Americans should be able to make those decisions for themselves, not have the one-size-fits-all program that Obamacare so often imposes on Americans.
Senator Tom Cott right here with Stephen A. Straight Shooter with Stephen A. right here over Sirius XM, POTUS Radio, Channel 124. What would you consider to be the state of the Republican Party at this particular moment in time, particularly in light of Mamdani winning the mayoral seat in New York City, Cheryl winning the gubernatorial seat in New Jersey, Spanberger winning the gubernatorial seat in Virginia? We saw what happened with Higgins, the new mayor-elect of Miami. A lot of people are looking at things right now and saying the Democrats are gaining some traction, the Republicans are losing it. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I'd say first off, I try not to look at it like that in terms of a horse race. I'm still trying to think about what we can do to make life better for Arkansans and for all Americans. There'll be a time for campaigning as we get closer to the election next year, but there's still a lot of work left to govern. And in the end, I think governing well is the best kind of political campaign you can have. But second, more directly to your point, Stephen A., there's a long pattern in American politics of the party in power, having a tough time of it in a midterm. Sometimes that's been defied, but it's pretty common. You know, in 2018, we lost the House of Representatives. We won the Senate. We actually expanded our majority in the Senate. So there's no question that we could face headwinds next year in the election. Everyone's prepared for that. Donald Trump, John Thune, Mike Johnson, all Republicans in the House and the Senate. And we think the best way, again, to hold on to our majorities in both the House and the Senate, hopefully grow them, is to help make lives better for the people we represent, to put more money back in their pockets, make their streets safer, get drugs off their streets, give them better choices for their kids' education, make the country safer and stronger. That's the best way to succeed in the election next year, and that's what we've worked on so hard over the last 10 months and what we'll continue to work on over the next 11 months.
It's something, listen, but you had somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene that obviously, just announced that she'll be leaving the House in January, and she's been outspoken against the president in recent memory after being an absolutely loyalist when it came to him, which shocked a lot of people. And they're talking about how the Republican Party doesn't seem to have its eye on the ball. Like, she even challenged him. He was talking about America's first, but he's all over the place. But yesterday we saw him campaigning, and I shouldn't say campaigning, but giving a speech in the Poconos or what have you. It seems to be that he's become increasingly aware that there are things that are changing. There's a vibe that's changing in this country. What level of culpability do you attach to? What do you think? Because I know that you're somebody that supports him very, very much. But what do you think he could do better? And do you believe he's playing a role in possibly hurting the party right now, if for no other reason, because of his behavior, how he might talk to people, how he might act towards people, how he might turn people off? What do you think about all of that, Senator Cotton?
Well, first, I haven't reviewed every in and out that Congresswoman Green and President Trump have said about each other in the last few weeks. It does seem to me, though, from a distance, they may not be on each other's Christmas card list this year.
That's right. I think that's fair.
I do think some of the differences are with the president's foreign policy, and I, for one, think the president has done very well this year, not just protecting us from drugs coming out of Latin America, but helping protect us from the threat of a nuclear Iran, continuing to support Ukraine as it fights against an unprovoked war of aggression by Russia, and trying to stand up to China. I don't always agree with the president. I've had my differences in the past with him, first term and second term. I try to work through those collegially and professionally. Obviously, we agree a lot more than we disagree. But I know that he's 100% committed, not just to working for the American people, but politically to trying to hold on to his majorities in the Congress. Because the simple fact is, with Republican majorities, we can continue to advance our agenda. I'm afraid if we lose and have Democratic majorities, you may see 2 years of nothing but investigations and maybe multiple impeachments if the first term is any predictor of the second term.
I wanted to ask you this because I know you just brought this up. You said there are things that you disagreed with him about. Inquiring minds want to know. I want to know what you've disagreed with President Trump about, if you don't mind telling me. I'd like to know. I think my audience would like to know that. We don't hear too many Republicans saying, we disagreed with Trump on something. So when somebody says it, that's news to me. I want to know what those things were, if you don't mind telling me, sir.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's no secret that I opposed something called the First Step Act back in the first term. I thought it was a bill that was going to release criminals from prison who shouldn't be released, that they were a danger to our society. They might go on to commit future crimes. The president, I think, was maybe somewhat lukewarm on it, but there's a lot of people in his administration pushing hard. In the end, it got passed with large bipartisan majorities. I think that was a misstep. The president's been, in my opinion, very strong on crime, cracking down on it in this term. But that's one example of something I disagreed with him on. I would contrast, Stephen A., the first term to the second term.
Okay.
And
how so?
When Donald Trump came into office, when he won in 2016, it was a singular event in the history of presidential politics. We've never had a man elected with no history of high public office. He had never been a senator, cabinet member, governor, congressman, general. And that meant that he had not had long-time experience in public life with a large group of people around him who had been colleagues, co-workers, aides, and what have you. I mean, just contrast it to George Bush 43, who came in not just with all the people that knew him and worked with him in Texas, but his father's network as well. So I think in some ways the first Trump term got off to a slower start than I would have liked. It took a little bit longer to make certain decisions that I would have liked to see made early. Now that's very different from January of 2025. President Trump by that point had been in public life for 10 years. He had built a large movement. He has a large group of former aides and advisors, elected officials who had supported him. So he was able to get much more like-minded people in position early on who are ready to move right out of the gate. So for instance, it only took about 5 months before we took decisive action against Iran nuclear program, whereas in the first term it took about 16 months to impose new sanctions and withdraw from the disastrous nuclear deal. So I think in the second term, you've seen things moving a lot faster, moving in the direction that I would support much faster than we saw in the first term. I certainly was advocating in the first term, in the first year, to move fast on a lot of these fronts. I just think the president had some people around him, advising him in the Congress, who didn't quite get why he'd been elected, why the American people wanted to turn to Donald Trump as opposed to a more traditional politician. And I think that's one reason why he's off to such a faster start this term than he was in the first term.
Well, he's off to a faster start in the second term, but in the same breath, his approval ratings don't exemplify that. You got a lot of people that are disapproving of some of the things that he's doing, what have you. How do you explain that at this particular moment in time?
Again, these are pretty common patterns in American politics. Once a president takes office, he normally has a burst of a surge in his approval rating. Sometimes it declines over time. President Trump is still ahead of where George Bush 43 and where Barack Obama were in the same time based off fluctuations in their approvals as well. I think the best way to approach that is not to think about approval rating or horse race numbers, but think about delivering for the American people, making our country safer, more prosperous, and helping people live a better life. If you do that, elections tend to work out well.
Two questions left for you, if you don't mind. One is about you, because this is about your Senate run. A sixth-generation Democratic farmer named Hallie Schaffner has launched her Senate campaign to unseat you in 2026. I want to know what your response is to her saying that you turned your back on farmers by voting against the Farm Bill twice.
Well, the Democrats have their own primary, Stephen A., so I'll let them work out their differences in their primary, and then we can have a general election campaign later next year. But I voted for the Farm Bill just a few months ago. Our big budget bill in the summer had a Farm Bill that my colleague, John Bozeman, as the chair of the Ag Committee, drafted, and it provides an important safety net for our farmers. It provides important reforms to the food stamp program to make sure that the people who need and deserve that nutritional assistance are getting it, but we don't have people who are getting it through fraud or because they're not working hard enough. The past farm bills, in my opinion, didn't have enough reforms to the food stamp program, but I was very pleased this year to vote for John Bozeman's farm bill as part of our big budget bill. I think it's going to make a big difference for our farmers, not just yet. It doesn't kick in until later next year, but I think it's going to help our farmers in Arkansas and all across the country.
Well, I'll let you get on out of here, Senator Cotton. Obviously, terrible news. 2 National Guards people were shot. 1 was killed. We all know about this in the nation's capital a couple of weeks ago. You served in Afghanistan. I'd like to know your thoughts on how we respond to the killing of a National Guard member by an Afghan refugee who previously served in an elite U.S. counterterrorism unit and was resettled under the U.S. refugee program this year. We saw what President Trump said, really about just stopping folks, Afghans, from coming into the country. What do you think the appropriate response to that should have been?
Yeah, well, first off, just let me say, I think the best and the most immediate response anyone can do is pray. Pray for Sarah Beckstrom's family. She passed away a couple weeks ago, right after the shooting. Andrew Wolf is recovering. Let's pray for his continued quick recovery. I think we need to take a much closer and more careful look at all the Afghans who are rushed out of Afghanistan during the collapse in 2021. I think it's important for your listeners to know that when you talk about so-called vetting, it's very hard to do that in Afghanistan. I mean, it barely has governing institutions. What our intelligence officers, what our military considered vetting to make someone safe to work at the gate on our bases or work as an interpreter is a very different and much lower standard than what you would expect for vetting someone to come to this country, to live in our communities, to go to our schools, and ultimately become an American citizen. I think we need to take a much closer look at every person that we admitted to this country. And if they're not safe and we can't verify they're safe to be here, then they need to go. Now, I understand the argument that if they go back to Afghanistan, they're going to be killed by the Taliban. Well, we have, fortunately, a lot of partners and allies around the world who have been open to taking Afghans that were coming straight out of Afghanistan. I think that's something the Trump administration will probably want to open a dialogue about with other countries who are partners of the United States, who depend on us in many ways. If these people can't live here in the United States and we can be 100% certain that that our communities are going to be safe, then we've got to take action.
I know it was going to be my last question, but I promise you this is going to be it, because I have one more, because I open my mouth constantly lamenting the fact that it doesn't appear as if folks are willing to work across the aisle. And one of the things that I'm big on is that when there's vitriol coming from both sides of the aisle, it scares the American people, because if y'all can't come together, or y'all appear to not be able to come together, then that frustrates us, because the next thing you know, we're fighting in the streets, for crying out loud, because our leaders, our politicians, you know, they are doing that. However, with you, you're working on 2 bills with Senate Democrats, according to my research. The Defense Act bill and the Counter Act bill. One is with Senator Jackie Rosen out of Nevada. The other was with Senator Kristen Gillibrand out of New York. Wanted to know what you wanted to mention about those 2 bills and what it's like working across the aisle. Let people know if that's what y'all are doing. That's what they need to know.
Yeah, sure, Stephen A. And I think it's important that that everybody realize that although we have deep philosophical divisions, and that leads to naturally heated arguments about policy and the direction of the country, we can do that in a civilized manner. We can have disagreements without being disagreeable. That's one thing I respect about your show and the guests you have on. The person who's your implacable opponent today in the Senate may be your indispensable ally tomorrow. And Jackie and Kirsten are two good examples of that. We vote opposite of each other a lot, but on these bills we're coming together to try to keep our country safe. At most big sporting events, for instance, the airspace is restricted. So at Razorback Stadium, although unfortunately we're not going to be playing football anytime soon in Razorback Stadium
no, you're not.
Until next fall, or at Gillette Stadium with the Bills Patriots this weekend, that airspace is restricted. There's no one, though, to enforce those restrictions. Right now, only federal agents can enforce, and there's just not enough federal agents to protect every football stadium on a Saturday or Sunday in America, or baseball games, or NASCAR races, or big concerts, or political rallies. What this legislation would do, in part, is to essentially deputize state and local authorities trained by the FBI, certified by them, to enforce those restrictions, to use things like jamming or spoofing to make sure that fans who are going to go to, say, college football playoffs this weekend, if the law was already changed, will be protected from drones coming into their airspace. A second part of it is also going to protect our military bases. You remember a couple years ago we had a lot of drones of unidentified origin flying around military installations on the East Coast. Our commanders have very little authority to protect their airspace. If a box truck is barreling towards the front gate and won't stop, the guards have the authority to use lethal force to take it out. We should use the exact same force to protect our military installations from threats from the sky that we would from the ground. Jackie and Kirsten have been great partners on this legislation. It just passed tonight in the House of Representatives as part of a larger defense package with more than 300 votes, as is very common on these important national security bills. So, like you say, it's an example of sometimes the rhetoric can be pretty heated on cable news or social media, but here behind the scenes, we often work together pretty well to try to advance common shared interest and visions for the future of the country.
Senator Cotton, really appreciate you giving that explanation. Thank you for the education, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on this show. I really, really appreciate it, and thank you so much. And always feel free to come back anytime you like. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Stephen A. Appreciate you. Merry Christmas to you and all your listeners.